Let us open our Bibles on John chapter 3. Let us go to John chapter 3. Let us begin reading from verse 22 until the end of the chapter. Last Sunday, I was able to properly explain, I hope, verses 22, 23, 24. And then I think I kind of skipped. I did make a few comments, but not enough, on verse 25. And then I explained verse 26 and 27 at length. So today I'm going to go back to verse 25, and then I'll continue from verse 28 until verse 30. That's my goal for today. Or you can say I'm going to preach the second half of the sermon that was supposed to be last Sunday. Let us read, for the sake of context, from verse 22 until the end of the chapter, John chapter 3. After these things, Jesus and his disciples came into the land of Judea, and there he remained with them and baptized. Now John also was baptizing in Aenon, near Salem, because there was much water there. And they came and were baptized, for John had not yet been thrown into prison. Then there arose a dispute between some of John's disciples and the Jews about purification. And they came to John and said to him, Rabbi, he who was with you beyond the Jordan, to whom you have testified, behold, he is baptizing, and all are coming to him. John answered and said, a man can receive nothing unless it has been given to him from heaven. You yourselves bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. He who has the bride is a bridegroom, but the friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly because of the bridegroom's voice. Therefore, this joy of mine is fulfilled. He must increase, but I must decrease. He who comes from above is above all. He who is of the earth is earthly and speaks of the earth. He who comes from heaven is above all, and what he has seen and heard, that he testifies, and no one receives his testimony. He who has received his testimony has certified that God is true. For he whom God has sent speaks the words of God, for God does not give the Spirit by measure. The Father loves the Son and has given all things into his hand. He who believes in the Son has everlasting life, and he who does not believe the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God abides on him. So far, the reading of the word of our Lord. What a passage, huh? What a passage. John had to tell his disciples, guys, take it easy. Understand that for this very purpose I came. My ministry is a ministry of transition. I am transitioning the people from the time that they were waiting for the Messiah to the actual coming of the Messiah. What's happening here is the work of heaven. No one can have anything if it does not come from heaven. Which, by the way, that applies to the situation here, but that applies to you and I on all matters that we go through. So that actually puts quite a different perspective on what we call good news and bad news, isn't it? Because if everything comes from heaven, and heaven loves his children, how would anything be too much? How would anything not work for our good? Puts a different perspective on what we call bad news and good news. But let me continue. We have seen that John was okay. John was excited to see that people were going to Jesus instead of coming to him. It was a bittersweet moment on his ministry. And we saw that his disciples were focusing more on the actual person instead of focusing on the person's message. They were loving John, the human being, the person, the figure, more than they were adhering to his teachings. It was also a problem. It was a big problem. And now we come to this verse 25 here, which is a little bit, at first glance, it looks a little bit out of position, doesn't it? Look at verse 25. Then there arose a dispute between some of Jonah's disciples and the Jews about purification. What do you make of this verse? Before, the connection with the verse before, it's not obvious. The connection with the verse after is also not obvious. How was the debate? I mean, we know the debate was about purification, but okay, and so what? It looks like this, somebody put this verse here and it should not have been here. That's how it looks. I'm not saying that's how it is, but that's how it looks. So in order to find out what is actually meant here, you need to consider the details. You have to look in depth. And here's the arguments that I'm going to make. This verse is very, very well situated. What was happening there? They were talking about baptism, and then the debate arose about purification. Let me ask you this. What is your view of baptism? Do you believe that baptism has power? Do you believe that the water that I take at the tab, I take the water on the tab and I bring to the front and I put the water on the hair of the baby, or an adult perhaps. Do you think that that water is powerful? It came from the tab. Or maybe I bought it at Meyer, purified water. Or maybe it came from the springs of Switzerland, the Alps. Do you think that deed, that action, do you think that itself is powerful? Do you think that when that water touched the baby's or the adult's head, it cleansed him somehow? I heard of this atheist that started a church I think in England. I think it was in England. I think somewhere in the UK. And he called the Church of the Atheists. And the entry ritual was a hair dryer. So we baptize babies. So he takes the hair dryer and he dries the hair of the people. I'm not making this up. I'm not just saying so. This is that actually happens. So he wants to dry their hair because he wants to dry the water of baptism from their heads. That's the entry into the Church of the Atheist. They're renouncing their baptism. That's the ritual that they have. Nevertheless, is this true? On the past, until today, by the way, it was a common belief that if a baby dies without being baptized, the baby will go straight to hell. It has to be baptized. Or at least to purgatory. I think they call nimbus infantum, like a kind of a purgatory division that was only for babies. They believed that. But if he was baptized, then it's good. I believe until today, in some churches teach that baptism removes the effects of original sin. That you are born a sinner and you are born inclined towards evil, as that we teach. You and I believe that. We teach that. But the baptism, according to some churches, causes the person not to be inclined towards evil anymore, but to be inclined towards God. Now, we call that conversion. They call that just a baptismal regeneration. There are many evangelical pastors that wrongly teach that you cannot enter heaven if you're not baptized. Like they say that straight away. If you're never baptized, no heaven for you. End of story. So you see that this debate about baptism and purification has not died out until today. A debate that began there, or maybe even before, continues very well until today. But what do we... Now, before I even speak about what's the connection of this with the context, let me make a small note on what we believe about baptism. We don't believe that any of the sacraments have power. Sacraments are true, baptism and Lord's Supper. We do not believe that any of them have power in themselves, but the power comes when they are exercised by faith. By faith. So the power comes from God Himself and not for the element itself. You see the difference? Another one, you may be thinking, but Felipe, what if it's a baby? How can the baby exercise faith? No, we don't baptize a baby based on the baby's faith. We baptize a baby based on the promise of the parents to nurture that child from a young age in the ways of the Lord. That's why we actually ask the parents, do you promise that you're going to teach your child to read and write? See, if anybody were to tell me, Felipe, I do not promise that I'll teach my child to read and write, I would not baptize that person, because that person is not qualified to teach this to the child. I would demand that from the person. Of course, I can make such a demand on nowadays where pretty much everybody can read and write. On the past, different questions had to be asked. But we baptize a child based on the parents' promise to nurture the child in the faith, so that the child may grow in the community of believers. So, no, we don't believe that baptism will purify, even if you are an adult. Even if you're being baptized when you are 30 years old. We don't believe that the baptism will purify you. We believe that the only thing that can purify you is one thing and one thing only: the blood of the Lamb. End of story. Nothing else purifies. Nothing else justifies but the blood of the Lamb. That's it. That's it. But they were having a debate about that. Now, do we know how the debate went? No, we don't. But here's how I believe it went. Two parties that were both baptizing were having a debate about purification. So what I would imagine that took place here, even though I cannot prove it, is that one party was saying, no, our baptism is better than your baptism. Our baptism, see, we have Jesus with us here. And the other guys would say, no, but we have John the Baptist with us. So my product is better than your product. I believe the debate was somewhat on those terms. Can I prove that? No, I cannot. But the context kind of makes me think that. Because they were having an argument. And they were both baptizing. The Jesus party was baptizing. The John the Baptist's party was baptizing. So I believe that's more or less how the debate went. Now you may ask, Felipe, what does purification have to do with the rest of this chapter then? Because the rest of this chapter is talking about the bride of Christ. What does purification has to do with the bride of Christ? And this debate, purification, could it be that one was actually better than the other? Let me first answer the question. Can somebody be more justified or less justified than somebody else? See, or you are justified, or you are not justified. There is no such thing as, I am half justified. Do you know what half justified people get? They get a prison sentence. That's what they do. If a judge sees that somebody is only half justified, a sentence will still be given. Well, you're going to do, 6 months on the county's jail. So that person is not justified. Or the person walks free, or the person does not walk, or rather walks to the jail. Those are the only two options. Of course, there are degrees of punishment, but that's a category within condemnation. So, or you are justified, or you are not. Now, there can be different levels of sanctification. Let me prove it to you. I hope with all my heart that today you are closer to Christ than you were when I first got to this church. After all, I've been preaching here for I don't know how many years. If you are on the same way, on the same spot, with your walk with the Lord than 5 years ago, or when did I get here? Like 7 years ago or something? Something, like say 6. If you are on the same spot until today, my goodness. I do sincerely hope that you and I have made progress in our faith, that we love Jesus more today, that we know His Word more today, that we are more devoted to His cause more today. So you see, there can be different degrees of sanctification. But the justification, no. See, or you owe me money or you don't owe me money. Or I owe you money or I don't owe you money. So, it's a silly thing to believe that, I'm halfway to heaven. Or I'm kind of a Christian. Or I'm 33% saved. Or I am 22% born again. That doesn't exist. Or one is justified, or one is not justified. But what about the connection of the rest of the passage, Felipe? With the bridegroom, there is a conversation about bride, about marriage. What does this have to do with purification? Keep a finger there, please, and go to Ephesians. I kindly ask you to go there with me. If you can, please, I could read it to you, but I very much want you to follow. Ephesians chapter 5. I shall patiently wait for you. Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25. Uh, 25 all the way to verse 27. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 25 to 27. Listen to this. Husbands, love your wives. My wife tells me that her job is much easier than mine. She says, Felipe, I have to respect you, but you gotta love me. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify, look at that, and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word. Oh, look at that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or anything. This spot or wrinkle means impurity, not have anything dirty on it, being completely clean. That's what it means. Let me continue. But that she should be holy and without blemish. Did you see that? So Jesus is in the business of purifying the church, sanctifying the church. Why? The church is his bride. Do you guys remember Hosea? Remember that we had a whole series on Hosea? I think we had like 20 sermons on Hosea or something. It was like half a year on the book of Hosea. And Hosea was that prophet that whose wife was a difficult woman. She used to be a prostitute. He took her, married her, was faithful to her, and she betrayed him and ran away and slept with half of the town. And yet, he loved her and went after her again to get her back. What was the business of Hosea? I want to make you, woman, an honest woman. I want to make you a one-man wife. I want to make you a holy person. I want to make you indeed wearing white. I want you to wear white with me. You'll be pure with me. That was the business of Hosea. What is the business of Jesus? According to Ephesians, care for his bride. I want to open a parenthesis here. This is a side note to today's sermon. Today's sermon is about the centrality of Christ. But I want to open a parenthesis here and talk about these words of Paul. Listen to this. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church. If you ever ask yourself, how much should I love this woman of mine? The answer is, you should love said woman of yours, just as Jesus loved his church. Well, how much was that? I'm not sure, because I'm still trying to find the depth. I've been trying my entire life. And it's still deeper than when I first began. It's an infinite love. Jesus loves his bride with a measure that cannot be measured. How much should a husband love his wife? Just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. Now observe that Jesus was in the business of sanctifying his wife. Husbands, you and I are in the business also of striving for the sanctification of ourselves first and our wives second. Remember, the well-being, the spiritual well-being of your home lays on your shoulders. Remember this, husbands. Remember this. It is up to you to make sure that your home is being run according to the will of the Lord. I ask you, when was the last time you asked around in your home, honey, are you reading your Bible every day? Dear wife, how is your prayer life? How often do you do that? Remember, Jesus is our standard. Your standard is not the way your father was a husband. Your standard is not the way your grandpa on whatever side, or your great-grandpa, or your neighbor, or somebody that you watched on the movies, or me, or you name it. Your standard is Jesus and Jesus alone. We believe in Christian marriages. And a Christian marriage is a marriage in which the husband attempts to sanctify himself and his wife. That's the side note. Now let me go back to today's central point here. So we see that the purification debate was very much connected to baptism, and this was connected with the work of Jesus and the work of John in bringing the news of Jesus. Then we saw in verse 26, they came to him and said, hey, dear Rabbi, dear Master John the Baptist, there is a gentleman there, the dude you talked about, they did not even mention his name. So I think they were a bit annoyed. So the guy you talked about, the one that was supposed to come, the guy you spoke of, he's baptizing and everybody's coming to him. Our numbers are diminishing. We are on a ministerial crisis. And John the Baptist said, hold on. Heaven is doing that. Not you, not I. Heaven is sending people to the arms of Christ. If heaven is doing that, why should I complain? Now, Let me look at let me continue from verse 28 on detail. Look at this. You yourselves bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. So he's saying, guys, do not miss what is right in front of you. I spent my entire ministry being the voice that cries in the wilderness, preparing the way of the Lord. And now that the Lord comes, you guys are upset. Now, who is the man that builds a road, and when the cars start driving on the road, gets upset with the cars? He built the road so that the cars may drive. He is saying, I have been saying, he is coming, he is coming, he is coming. And now that he comes, you guys are annoyed? What kind of nonsense is that? That's his argument. And now, on verse 29, let me make another comment on verse 28. Have you guys noticed how John the Baptist keep on talking about witness? I bore witness. John chapter 1, John bore witness of him and cried out. And here again, you bear me witness that I said. So this, he said, I said, he said, I said, the bearing witness is all connected to voice. The voice is a topic that is very important here. Voice. Look at verse 9. He who has the bride is a bridegroom, but the friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears, listen to this, hears, rejoices greatly because of the bridegroom's voice. Did you see? Are you guys noticing this? It's all about voice and speaking and bearing witness. And John, look, who was John? John is the voice that cries in the wilderness. So, John and voice seem to be the same thing here. On the previous sermon, I was mentioning that John was the king's herald, the one that goes ahead and announces, "Here, everyone, there comes blah, 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 blah." So it's the guy that goes ahead to announce the coming of somebody greater than him. Now, John presents himself as a friend of the groom, not the groom. He presents himself as one that is beside him, but kind of in a distance, like kind of far away. Jesus is at the spotlight, but he is kind of a bit far. And John the Baptist's voice was always a limited voice. Let's compare. John was in the wilderness crying out, preaching, speaking loudly, and John was quite a vision, I tell you. Remember one day that Jesus, with this passage where Jesus said, "What did you guys went out to see in the desert?" Jesus said that. Did you guys went out to see a cane moved by the wind? I imagine because John the Baptist might have been very skinny. I mean, he ate honey and locusts, desert food, whatever you can find in the desert, in the wilderness. I doubt he was fat. I would imagine he was this big, this thick. And he was an odd-looking guy, dressed in camel's skin and a big leather belt, speaking in the middle of nowhere, speaking loudly. Very odd figure. That was his voice. Let's look at the voice of God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And God said, "Fiat lux, let there be light." And there was light. You see that? You see the difference of voices. One voice is just in the desert and quite odd. The other voice makes the word. Another voice. Let me give you another example of Jesus' voice. Lazarus died. The two sisters are crying. Jesus, if you had been here, he would have lived. Everybody cried. Everybody cried. Jesus cried. And then Jesus goes and cries out, "Lazarus, come out. By the way, do you think Lazarus ever had a choice? Can you imagine Lazarus shouting back, no! Oh man, I'm alive. That's why I could say no. You see the voice? You see the power of the voice? He just said, Lazarus, come. Don't deal. The man was alive again. You see the voice? So that's why the voice here is so crucial. But John is saying, yes, I'm also a voice. But I am this voice. Jesus is that voice. I'm the voice that announces the voice that everybody should be hearing. So he said to his disciples, guys, I'm a voice that talks about the voice. I am a voice. He is the voice. Why are you jealous of a voice? Because a voice is losing the following to the voice. And John said, and I tell you more, I'm very happy about it. Now, that's Christianity at its finest. John, your following is diminishing. John, your fame is getting smaller. John, people are less interested about you. But John, in all of this, God is being glorified. John, how do you feel? And John replies, awesome. Did you get that? Rejoices greatly because of the bridegroom's voice. Did you get that? The coming of Jesus meant that John was going to be a lesser deal. John, how do you feel about that? Awesome. As long as Jesus is coming, I feel awesome. John, you're not going to be so famous. John, they're going to talk about Jesus more than they talk about you. How do you feel about that? Ecstatic. John, Jesus will come and make a whole lot of miracles. But John, there shall be no miracle recorded about you. How do you feel about that? Unbelievably happy. Did you get that? Let me tell you this. This is what the new birth does to a person. The new birth reorients the person's entire feelings and cause him to be at his happiest when Jesus is most exalted. Let me compare. Here's the non-Christian. He is happiest when he is most exalted. Here's a Christian. He is the happiest when Jesus is most exalted. But what if his circumstances are royally horrible, incredibly bad? That affects not his rejoicing. I'll prove that to you. The apostles in the prison. What were they doing in the prison? Singing praises. Singing praises. They received quite a beating, and then they were released. How did they feel? They rejoiced because they were able to suffer for the cause of Jesus Christ. Did you get that? Did you see how their circumstances played no role on their joy? But the glory of Christ was everything there was to it. Did you get it? That's the result of the new birth. The new birth causes the person to be happy or less happy based on how Jesus is shining through him. That's it. And that's what John is saying. The bridegroom is come. But John, that means you're not going to be a big deal. I'm happy. Now, let me give you the background here. Bridegroom, friend of the bridegroom. shoshbin, that's the word for the friend of the bridegroom, shoshbin. I think in English would be, in American culture, would be something like your best man on a wedding. Now, how was the wedding at that time? Here's how it happened at that time. The bridegroom, the husband to be, had to prepare his house. The wedding would happen only after the house was prepared. So that had to happen. And who helped him prepare the house? The best man. In fact, the best man was in charge of getting the house of the bridegroom settled, ready. You gotta love that best man to do all of that for you, isn't it? He had to prepare everything, and he was tasked to being in communication with the bride. So he would be bringing messages back and forth. The best man would go to the wife-to-be's house and talk to her and say, look, we're thinking about making the house like this and like that. What do you think of it? So what do you say? Do you think we can agree on some things here? And he would be doing the conversation, and he would be the one preparing the house so that the wedding can happen. If the house is not ready, no wedding takes place. So the best man would do all of that, the bridegroom's friend. He would be going back and forth. And then comes the final day, the great day, the wedding day. The best man comes with the bridegroom and walks to the house of the bride. And at that moment, the bridegroom calls out to the bride. Remember the parable of the 10 virgins? That 5 of them were wise and the other 5 were stupid. The first 5, they had enough oil. The other 5, they were not wise and they did not have enough oil. So the husband came in the middle of the night. He came at midnight, and only half of them had the oil to keep the light on. So only the 5 that had the oil could walk with the bride and the bridegroom back. That was it. That's it. So the bridegroom comes and shouts. Look at this. Rejoices greatly because of the bridegroom's voice. So the bridegroom comes and shouts and calls out to the bride. The bride leaves her house with the bridegroom, and they go and they have wedding, and the house is set. How big of a role the best man had until the bridegroom came? A huge role. Communicating with the bride, talking to the church. Isn't that what John the Baptist was doing? Preparing the church. Isn't that what John the Baptist was doing? Preparing the way. Isn't that he was preparing the house? And then, what is the role that the best man plays when the bridegroom calls out to the bride? Nothing. The best man, at this moment, he becomes not even a footnote. Did you get that? Before, he was crazy busy preparing the house, doing the communication. But from that moment onwards, he completely vanishes. He's not even in the picture anymore. Now, I want to propose the following. Imagine if the bridegroom's friend were to insist on being on the picture. There comes the bridegroom, calls out the bride comes, they hold hands. Now imagine the best man being there. Oh, can I hold your hand too? Can I hold the hand too? Can you hold my hand? Can you hold my hand? Can you imagine how bizarre? The bride and the bridegroom would be annoyed at the guy and say, get away from here. It's our moment. It's not your moment. This is the moment of two, bride and bridegroom and bride. Don't bother us. Don't annoy us. It's like trying to have a romantic date with three. Doesn't really work, does it? So John is saying, guys, that moment has come. Now, on a wedding, is the best man like this? Oh, I was a big deal before. Now, oh, now nobody talks about me. Nobody cares. Can you imagine a bridegroom's friend like that? It's a bizarre thing. Let me tell you what's bizarre as well. When you and I want to take the glory that belongs to Jesus, that's bizarre. Let me tell you what's bizarre. When you and I think it's about us and not about Jesus. Let me tell you what's bizarre. Is when we want to do things for the bride or for the bridegroom, but we don't want them to shine, we want ourselves to shine. That's bizarre. Do you know what's bizarre? Sin. Do you know what's bizarre? Being a show-off. That's bizarre. That's bizarre. Can you imagine how the people on the wedding feast would feel about the bridegroom's friend that tries to outshine the bridegroom? They'll be angry at him. They'll think, dude, know your place. Know your place. You did your job. Consider yourself satisfied and move. Guys, that's what we need to do. We need to do our job, which is to seek the glory of Christ and move. And we do not seek the spotlight. We ought to seek to put Jesus on the spotlight. Let me tell you how often we fail to do that. For example, we're talking about family, husbands caring for the wives, caring for the house. Let me give an example of how we fail to be like Jesus, or to put Jesus on the spotlight. When we teach, for example, our children, do this or don't do that. And the reasons we give them is because daddy don't like it, or because mommy will be upset, or because of whatever. Who is on the spotlight? Why are we not saying, son, daughter, do this and do that because of what Christ teaches us? Or husbands and wives. Have you noticed how often fights happens between husband and wives? Because they fail to consider what Christ wants, and they consider so much what they want. The other day I heard of this couple that got divorced because of a fight that began over toothpaste. The wife wanted to squeeze the toothpaste tube on the middle, but the husband thought you should squeeze on the bottom and slowly make your way up. That was it. That began a fight that ended up in divorce. That's bizarre. That's bizarre. What changes between those people and you and I? Because we may have more sophisticated reasons for fighting. But at the heart, the sin is the same. That Jesus was not at the center, but we were at the center. And guys, I'm as guilty as the next guy. You are as guilty as the next guy or the next gal. We are guilty of that. So instead of seeking to do what John the Baptist taught us, we are trying to do our own. This is the last, and in my opinion, the central verse here. He must increase, but I must decrease. Observe there are two things that need to be happening. Some people think, oh, he can increase, and Jesus must increase, and they stop there. They stop there. Why? Because they want to be like this. Jesus must increase, and so do I. But observe that John the Baptist is saying, he must increase, but I must decrease. Those two things ought to happen. Now, why? Why is that the case? Let me tell you this. If one is not happening, neither will the other. There is a limited amount of spotlight. We are human beings. We are limited in all that we think, do, or say, or act, or consider, or attempt to do, or attempt to be, or attempt to think. We are limited in all ways, shapes, and forms. We are limited. My attention is limited. If something grows on my eyes, on my estimation, some other things will receive less attention. There is no way around that. My day has only 24 hours, so does yours. If you spent X amount of hours thinking about something, that grows, the time you spent thinking about something else will unavoidably diminish. The amount of attention is limited. The spotlight has a limit. Therefore, both needs to be happening. If I come to this pulpit and I start talking about myself, it will be needed that I will speak less about Jesus. Why? Because my sermons will not go on forever. You may feel that I preach forever, but they will not go on forever. You see the difference? So, there is a set amount, there is a limitation. So in order for Jesus to shine more, other matters must have a lesser relevance. I urge you and I to seek both. Let us have a lesser spotlight, and let Jesus have a greater spotlight. Let me talk about churches in general now. It's amazing to me how on every section of church life, people fight for the spotlight. If they are teaching, Sunday school, people tend to fight for those positions. Or once somebody is on that position, they fight and fight and fight because they want the minute details to be done according to their desires. Pastors and elders fight with each other for who has more power over the church. It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. Deacons fight for how the money should be distributed, be used within the church. And it's not even their money, but they want to have their say on how the money will be spent. It's amazing how. And now let me speak more about church leadership, particularly pastors. Let me begin with the evangelical churches, with the Protestant churches. It's amazing how some people seem to have never read this verse in their lives. I've heard of this church, not here in the U.S. I think it's somewhere in the East. I forgot the country. I don't know if it was Malaysia. That this friend of mine went to this church, and it was a church. There was a bishop on this church, and before the bishop began his sermon, before he would come to the pulpit to preach, the whole church would start shouting, "Awesome bishop! Awesome bishop! Awesome bishop!" And then he would come and preach his sermon. Can you imagine that? He must increase. And so do I. And I'll go right behind him on his vacuum. He's going to go up, and so will I. Another one, this I saw in Brazil. Church, forgot the name of the church. Pastor, let's call him Bob. Pastor Bob, uppermost. That's the title he gave himself. In Portuguese, the word was sumidade. Something like, he's the big gun, he's the expert, he's the highly respected, he's the uppermost, he is the last cold drink on a hot desert. Right there. Written on the billboard for everybody to see. Pastor Bob, uppermost. Another one, this is in Grand Rapids. Grand Rapids. There is a church called Excel Church. Excel Church. I saw the board. You can go online and Google for the church. Excel Church, comma. Not just another church. And you go on the website and you read the pastor's biography. Oh my. He looks half Jesus. I tell you, uppermost. But I read John the Baptist. He must increase, but I must decrease. What a shame. What a shame on us. Shame on us, Protestants, for being like that. And now there is a church it makes all of this looks like peanuts. It's the Roman Church. The Roman Church made an entire doctrine that goes precisely on the opposite direction of John chapter 3, verse 30. The vicar of the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, the papacy, he sits in the throne of St. Peter. He is Christ's vicar. Vicar means replacement. If, let's say, you know when people say, I wanna be happy vicariously. Let's say you have a good friend and you are so excited by your friend's good fortune or something good. Maybe your friend got a promotion. That you feel so happy that it looks like you got a promotion, you know? That's a beautiful thing. So you are happy vicariously. That person's happiness becomes your happiness. Or when you, let's say your brother or your sister or your son or your daughter achieve something amazing. And you feel like you got the promotion or whatever. Because you're so happy for the person. That's vicariously. The Pope of Rome is the vicar of Christ. Is the one that stands in place of. In some portions of this theology, they actually write, he is another Christ. See, how can that person decrease? See, if the Pope of Rome takes this to heart, he must increase, but I must decrease. I mean, he cannot. If you are the other Christ, but Christ needs to be exalted, and you are the other Christ, then you also have to be exalted. Then on this doctrine, it doesn't matter how much glory you give to the Pope, it's never enough. How much glory is enough for Christ? How much? How much glory is enough for Jesus? The answer is, it's never enough. We shall spend eternity singing His praises. How can He ever be enough? Salvation in Catholic doctrine is based not only, but among many things, also on this. Are you in fellowship or not with the Pope? Imagine. The guy holds your salvation on his hands. How can this person decrease? That's also one way for you to know if a church comes from God or if a church does not come from God. Is the minister of that church all about Jesus, or is the minister of that church all about himself? That's a very good way for you to consider how a church is. And I want to end the sermon with a few questions. You and I, is Jesus increasing in our estimation? Are we thinking more about Jesus and less about ourselves? And am I happy to have less of my way so Jesus can have more of His way? Is that a happiness? Can you and I say, can we make John the Baptist's words ours? I rejoice greatly with his increase and my decrease. Can you and I say that? Hopefully we'll be able to say that more and more. Amen. Let us pray. Blessed be your name, Almighty God. Oh Lord, may you increase. Lord, may every fiber of our being be employed for the increase of your glory. And Lord, automatically, may our diminishing, may our gradual vanishing, for the sake of Christ's increase, bring glory to your name and joy to our hearts. Lord, may your glory be the measure of our joy. Lord, may you be all in our homes. Lord, it's easy. It's so easy to come to church, behave nicely, and pretend that Jesus is the king of our home. It's so easy. Lord, may Jesus increase in our homes, in our personal lives. For the glory of His name, we pray.